So these past days we've been exploring, in theory and in practice, the four Brahma Viharas. So we've been talking about what these qualities of metta, mudita, karuna, and upekkha are, and how we might go about cultivating them in our lives, and particularly on this retreat, through the different bhavana practices, metta bhavana, karuna bhavana, mudita bhavana, and upekkha bhavana that we've been doing. And as we've been doing that, we've been exercising our will. We've been actually consciously and deliberately moving through particular reflections, particular evocations of different individuals and the whole world. And what's been happening is actually quite a profound transformation of desire. So we of course are embodiments or expressions of desire. And what we've been doing is we've been kind of transforming that desire from a desire that always refers to oneself to a desire that begins to take in more of others. So it's actually quite a profound reorientation of our being that we've been engaged in. Um, so sometimes that reorientation is apparent, and sometimes it isn't apparent. It's as if it's going on quite a long way under the surface, and we might not notice the sort of benefit or the effect of it immediately. So I think again, it's quite important to realize that. So as we've been engaging in this process of exercising our will, of transforming desire, we've been improving our states of mind. So no doubt we will have developed a better attitude towards others, a more emotionally positive attitude towards others, a more skillful attitude towards others, and we'll probably feel a bit more connected with others. Even if we're on our own, we will probably feel a bit more connected. Anyway, if that's not the case, it might be something interesting to discuss in the groups. Um, just, I wanted to just return to this poem that Maitreyi read a few days ago, St. Kevin and the Blackbird. Um, I think there's a lot in this poem, but anyway, I just wanted to read you the first four stanzas and then say a few things about it. So, and then there was St. Kevin and the Blackbird. The saint is kneeling, arms stretched out inside his cell, but the cell is narrow, so one turned up palm is out of the window, stiff as a crossbeam, when a blackbird lands and lays in it and settles down to nest. Kevin feels the warm eggs, the small breast, the tucked neat head and claws, and, finding himself linked into the network of eternal life, is moved to pity. Now he must hold his hand like a branch out in the sun and rain for weeks, until the young are hatched and fledged and flown. So the particular, I'll read the rest of it in a moment if you're hungry for the second part. But the bit I wanted to highlight is he holds the bird in his hand, and the poem says he finds himself linked into the network of eternal life. He finds himself linked into the network of eternal life. Um, and this is very much akin to what's happening in all of these practices that we've been doing. We find ourselves more linked into the network of life. And particularly, it's almost as if we start by what Kevin does is he holds one blackbird in his hand. Now the blackbird has eggs, and the eggs hatch, but it's a very particular life, and from that particular life, he's connected with something more universal, or the word that Seamus uses is eternal. And that again, it's very much akin to what happens in the practices. We take these particular individuals and our attitude towards them, and then it becomes universalized. It becomes more cosmic at the end of the practice. A little bit like the mother who's mentioned in the Metta Sutta, who watches over her only child um, at the risk of her own life. And we're encouraged in that sutta by the Buddha to have that kind of attitude for everybody. So yeah, so we basically we have this feeling of connection, this feeling of being knitted into the network of life, and we really feel for others, and so we feel more connected. But in a way, I think what's happening is it's not as if we're making that up, so to speak. What's happening, I think, with these practices is that we're actually coming more around to the way things actually are. We're coming more around to a recognition of the reality of things, that we are actually part of this thing called life. And it's our alienation from that which causes so much of our dukkha, probably maybe even all of our dukkha, the sense of alienation or separateness or selfishness. So Sangharakshita, in one of his poems, says, life doesn't belong to us, we belong to life. Life is king. And I think what happens when we start identifying that reality, when we start experiencing that reality and we start living in accordance with that reality as we transform our emotional life, we feel more of a sense of responsibility or even duty to the life that we're knitted together with. And that has an effect. So it's interesting in the poem, Kevin feels the warm eggs, the small breast, the tucked neat head and claws, and finding himself linked into the network of eternal life, is moved to pity. Now he must hold his hand like a branch out in the sun and rain for weeks until the young are hatched and fledged and flown. So having been linked, now he must hold his hand. So in a way, there's no option for him. Having made that connection with the bird, just dropping it on the ground isn't an option for him. So he has to hold his hand out there until the bird has done what the bird needs to do. So there's actually like a duty that arises, or a responsibility that arises from that connection. In a way, the whole of ethics in Buddhism arises from that truth. To harm another is to harm ourselves. When we really feel that, we will naturally act ethically. It's quite a profound shift, but I think that is the shift that's being encouraged of us, asked of us. So I was doing the Upekkha Bhavana yesterday morning, in the late morning, under Dhyasagara's expert guidance. And there's this reflection, isn't there, about you reflect on the suffering of the person, the joy of the person, and then the fact that those experiences are conditioned. And I just had this really strong feeling of kind of being stuck, of me and the other beings in the practice kind of being stuck in this conditioned world, kind of all tangled up or constricted by being subject to conditions. Kind of a feeling of constriction or constrainment, if that's a word. And it reminded me of this is about, if we're going to leave birds for a moment, this is about fish. There's an image in the Sutta Nipata where the Buddha he sort of describes this feeling of how fear arose in his mind before he was awakened. Fear arose in his mind. It disturbed him deeply because he saw conflict. He saw human beings in conflict, and this is what he says. Having seen people struggling and contending with each other, like fish in a small amount of water, fear entered me. The world is everywhere insecure. Every direction is in turmoil. Desiring an abode for myself, I did not find one uninhabited. When I saw contention as the sole outcome, aversion increased in me. But then I saw an arrow here, difficult to see, set in the heart. Pierced by it, one runs in every direction. But having pulled it out, one does not run, nor does one sink. So I always find that just a really vivid image of like a pond. You can imagine a pool of water. And of course, in India at the moment, it's raining buckets. But what happens, of course, is all these pools arise and the fish grow in the pools. And then the sun comes out again and the water begins to evaporate. And you get these ponds, these fish, but the water is diminishing day by day. And doesn't it feel like that sometimes on this earth? There's all these human beings, and it's as if the space that we have to take up is diminishing because we keep needing more and wanting more and more space. So yeah, and the only answer, of course, the Buddha is that he wants to get out. Now, getting out is a matter of his heart. He sees that the arrow of aversion is piercing his heart, and he needs to pull that out. So we can improve the situation. We can improve the conditions, and it's really good that we do that. And that's partly what we're doing with the Brahmaviharas. We're improving the situation. We're becoming kinder, more patient, more empathic, and so on. But actually, just improving the situation is not enough. We really need to get out. That's the only answer. We really need to get out. And what about all the others? They need to get out as well. So there's a really beautiful verse that comes in a sadhana practice or a visualization practice that I wanted to share with you at this point, which I think very, very beautifully captures that mood of wanting to get out, of feeling a little bit or maybe extremely desperate. And it says, beings who are our mothers and fathers wander in samsara. So with unbearable longing, we generate the unbearable longing to become a Buddha. So beings who are our mothers and fathers wander in samsara. So with unbearable longing, we generate the unbearable longing to become a Buddha. So this very much comes from a traditional worldview, a traditional Buddhist worldview, that you'll still find in Tibet, where people quite literally believe that every single living being, because of the rounds of rebirth, has at one time or other been their mother or father. That's just the way of things from that perspective. That there's been beginningless rebirth from beginningless time, so therefore every being has been one's mother and father at one point. Now, I don't think we can, from our worldview, can engage with that in the same kind of literal way. But I think what it points to is this bond that we have with all beings, this deep bond that we have with all beings, which we affirm, so to speak, particularly in the last stage of the practice, that we're linked in with all beings. And we want to get free, and we want to get free from them. And it feels kind of unbearable. There's this longing that arises, this longing to become a Buddha, to liberate oneself and to liberate others. So this, of course, is the Bodhisattva aspiration. And you could say it's a sort of a deeper level of Brahmaviharas. The Brahmaviharas are said to be the precursor or even an expression of Bodhicitta. So something else has to come in, a profound shift in perspective, in order to achieve that liberation, in order to liberate beings. And that's where I just wanted to touch into the second part of the poem, because I think the Kevin poem, because I think it gives us a clue. And since the whole thing's imagined anyhow, imagine being Kevin. Which is he? Self-forgetful or in agony all the time? From the neck on, out, down through his hurting forearms. Are his fingers sleeping? Does he still feel his knees? Or has the shut-eyed blank of under-earth crept up through him? Is there distance in his head? Alone and mirrored clear in love's deep river, to labour and not to seek reward, he prays. A prayer his body makes entirely, for he has forgotten self, forgotten bird, and on the riverbank forgotten the river's name. So it's really interesting, this poem, when you start looking into it a bit. And I mean, that's really key, that line, isn't it? And since the whole thing's imagined anyhow. Now, I'm going to get into this. I wasn't intending to, but it just occurred to me there that, and according to Buddhism, what we perceive as the world that we live in is actually imagined. We take the raw material that we receive through our senses, and then we construct from that a kind of a world in which we live in. And the crucial point there is that that's an action that we perform. We think that's what's happening, and that's real, and that's what everyone else is seeing too. We don't see that actually it's a construction. It's something that we're constructing and we're living in. And part of what Buddhism is involved with is actually, first of all, recognizing that the world we live in is a construction that we've made, and actually, in a way, starting to look at it differently, starting to look at it a little bit more as it really is. So recognizing that since the whole thing's imagined anyway, we can start imagining more deeply and more profoundly. So we can imagine being Kevin, or we can imagine being any person who we care to cultivate metta, karuna, mudita, or upekkha for. And Seamus asked the question, which is he, self-forgetful or in agony all the time? And I suspect he kind of answers the question because he talks about forgetting. At the end of the poem, he uses the word forgotten 3 times. So you really get the sense that he is self-forgetful. So a prayer his body makes entirely, for he has forgotten self, forgotten bird, and on the riverbank forgotten the river's name. So he hasn't gotten rid of anything. I think it's really interesting. He's just forgotten. And I think you get that sometimes when you get really absorbed in one of the Brahma Viharas, one of the bhavana practices associated with them, is you can just forget about yourself. You can become so absorbed. You also get this in other, if you become like really engrossed in a conversation with a friend, for example, you can just forget about yourself. The chatter ceases and you're just communicating. So what seems to happen here in this poem is there's a kind of a raising to a higher level of consciousness, where that self-reference doesn't arise. We're just communicating, we're just responding. There's no constantly bringing everything back to the self. And it's really interesting when you look at the first part of the poem and the second part of the poem. One of the key aspects of the first part of the poem is that Kevin is in a cell. So when I think of a cell, I always think of that. If you've been up to Glendalough, for those of you who don't live in Ireland, it's an ancient monastery by a loch in the Wicklow Mountains, not too far from Dublin. And there's a building which is kind of a little kind of cell. It's quite small, made of stone. It's got a stone roof, which is kind of quite unusual. I always think of that building when I think of it. So it's a tiny little box. And of course, the reason he puts his arms out the window in the first place is because he doesn't have room in the box, the little stone box, to reach his arms out. Now, in the second part of the poem, the cell's gone, and there's all this talk of rivers. All of a sudden, there's a river there. The river's not mentioned before. Maybe part of the reason I think of that cell in Glendalough is just next to the cell, there's a little river which drains the loch down the valley. Anyway, so the setting has changed. So it's as if the first, there's this sense of a cell, the sense of a restricted self. And then the second part of the poem, the images change, and there's this river, alone and mirrored, clear and love's deep river. So having something static and fixed and small and contained, you have a river which is flowing. And the last image is a riverbank. So you can imagine somehow suddenly we're on the riverbank and we've forgotten self, forgotten bird, and forgotten the river's name. So that sense of name, I think it's really interesting as well. I mean, I'm reading all sorts of things into this poem. I don't know what Seamus meant when he wrote it, but that sense of naming is one of the ways in which we construct the world that we live in, is we name things. And actually, when we name, we think we know what the thing is. So a certain phenomena, and we think, oh, that's a tree, or that's a house, or that's a bird. And then it's as if we think, okay, I know what that is now. But we don't really. So we've got to see beyond the name to the flow of experience in life that's really happening. And again, I think this is what the Brahma Viharas open us up to. They open us up to this life that we're part of, and we let go of our need to sort of fix it down with labels that constrict. Nothing wrong with labeling things. It's obviously necessary to communicate, but we go a step beyond, and we fix the world. So so the image of the river, I think, is really important. It comes out into the open, and there's movement. The river flows. You find a similar kind of idea in a poem by Sangharakshita. It's called The Unseen Flower. Some of you might know this poem. It's quite short. Compassion is far more than emotion. It is something that springs up in the emptiness, which is when you yourself are not there, so that you do not know anything about it. Nobody, in fact, knows anything about it. If they knew it, it would not be compassion. But they can only smell the scent of the unseen flower that blooms in the heart of the void. So the void, in a way, I mean, void can sound like an emptiness in the sense of an absence, but really the void is this state, I suppose, where you don't label, you're just open. So openness is a kind of a synonym for voidness or emptiness. So you're just open to what's there. You're no longer fixing. So of course this of course is the kind of the territory of the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva develops a deep regard and concern for living beings, but at the same time kind of questions or starts to examine the way that they're thinking about beings, the way that they're thinking about the world. This comes out very strongly in the Diamond Sutra. So I just wanted to read you a little bit of the Diamond Sutra. This is one of the more famous passages in this sutra. So the Blessed One, the Buddha, is having a conversation, a kind of a dialogue with Subhuti. The Blessed One said, "Hear, Subhuti, someone who has set out in the vehicle of a bodhisattva should produce a thought in this manner. As many beings as there are in the universe of beings, comprehended under the term beings, egg-born, born from a womb, moisture-born, or miraculously born, with or without form, with perception, without perception, and with neither perception nor non-perception, as far as any conceivable form of beings is conceived, all these I must lead to nirvana, into that realm of nirvana which leaves nothing behind. And yet, although innumerable beings have thus been led to nirvana, no being at all has been led to nirvana. And why? If in a bodhisattva the notion of a being should take place, he could not be called a bodhi being. And why? He is not to be called a bodhi being in whom the notion of a self or of a being should take place, or the notion of a living soul or of a person. So if that doesn't make sense, in a way, that's okay. But it's just trying to, in a way, kind of mess with our head a little bit and mess with what we think that we're trying to do. Because we can't deliver all beings. This is the whole point. It's impossible. So we have to change the level of consciousness. We have to change the way that we're thinking about the world that we live in and what it is that we're trying to do. And that takes us, like I was saying earlier, into a sort of another level. And I just wanted to return to the poem again. Alone and mirrored clear and love's deep river, to labour and not to seek reward he prays, a prayer his body makes entirely. So that, again, very expressive phrase, a prayer his body makes entirely. So it's as if his whole being is making this prayer. And this longing that I mentioned, that with unbearable longing, we generate the unbearable longing to become a Buddha, can express itself in prayer. Now, you might be thinking, what's prayer got to do with Buddhism? Because, of course, Kevin is a saint. So he, of course, will be praying, presumably, one assumes, to God. So we're not doing that, are we? We're not praying to God. But so we're not praying to a being who created the world in which we live, but there is a sense that we're praying to some kind of being, some kind of consciousness, some kind of entity. It's so difficult to talk when you start moving into this territory. We're praying to something beyond ourselves. We're praying from the point of view of the conditioned to something or for something um, uh, that's unconditioned, that's not bound up with the world, that's not in the pool with the other fish. So it's as if with the different bhavana practices, the metta bhavana, karuna bhavana, and so on, we're turning our desire outwards towards other beings. So we develop an unlimited heart of friendliness for the entire universe, sending metta above, below, and all round. But we're also sending our desire, our longing upwards, and this is the prayer, and it is part of what effects this kind of alchemical shift in terms of not just improving things, but moving beyond. Now, this is another avian metaphor for you. So the Buddha is called the elder brother of the world, or the elder brother of human beings. And he's called that because he's born first. In the same way that, if you're, I know there's a few people who are the eldest in the family. I'm looking at two of you, Anne and Attilio Mitra. You're born first. You come from the mother's womb first. And in the same way, the Buddha is spiritually born first. He awakens before everybody else. Now, apparently, this is probably maybe not ornithologically accurate, but apparently the first chick to emerge in a clutch of eggs helps the other chicks emerge from the egg by pecking on the shell from the outside. This is a lovely idea that you get in the Dharma, which is that we're trying to break out of our egg from the inside. So our little beak is tapping. Our little claws are scratching against the inside of the egg. But the Buddhas are tapping from the outside. Sometimes you get a kind of a feeling of this. You get a feeling that there's something outside of you that's calling you to wake up. You might have had that a sort of an inkling of that on this retreat. It's often just a vague kind of groping kind of intuition. But yeah, we have the sense of something kind of helping us from outside. And part of that help, part of the help that the Buddha offers us, that the three jewels offer us, is to affirm that it is in our nature as human beings to awaken. It's intrinsic to our nature as human beings to awaken. We often feel that it belongs somewhere outside of us, but when we make a connection with the Buddha, it sort of, as it were, awakens this conviction within us that we are made of the stuff of awakening, and this particularly comes out. It comes out in a puja that we do. We haven't done it on this retreat, where we say the Buddha was born as we are born. But it also comes out very, very forcibly in a text called the Bodhicitta, which is about the Bodhisattva's way of life. And there's this very expressive passage. It's talking about the Bodhicitta. So the Bodhicitta is, I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, this kind of cosmic force which awakens within one that kind of propels one to attain awakening for oneself, but also for all beings. And this is what the text says about the arising of the bodhicitta. It says, "Today my birth is fruitful, my human life is justified. Today I am born into the family of the Buddha. Now I am the Buddha's son, the Buddha's daughter. So that there may be no blemish upon this spotless family, I must now act as becomes my family. As a blind man may find a jewel in heaps of rubbish, so too this bodhicitta has somehow appeared in me." So again, it's not, hopefully we've had some kind of a sense of that on the retreat, that these Brahmaviharas, exalted as they are part of our humanity, and we're bringing that out more and more. And the more we bring that out, the more human we feel, and we enter into the family of the Buddha. We reorientate what we identify and who we identify with. A little bit like the case of dysentery. The Buddha says, he who would serve me, let him serve the sick. So it's as if that reaching up is also a reaching out. They're two aspects of the same kind of process. And it's a tension, isn't it? It's a tension. it feels like a genuine problem that we're trying to get out, and we're trying to help others to get out. Um, we're trying to look up, and we're trying to look sideways, so to speak, or even down. And it creates this kind of tension. And in order to hold what we are witnessing, in order to hold that tension, we need some kind of support. We need some kind of a sense that there's a bigger context in which we're doing that. In a word, we need a source of fearlessness. So that's partly what we're doing when we do. Well, it is what we're doing when we do puja. Um, we're holding that tension. We're holding that sense of being knitted into this fabric of eternal life that's trying to grow, that's trying to wake up. And that's the sense in which I think we're doing puja with all beings, and we're doing puja for all beings. In fact, all practices that we do, and this is something that comes out particularly in the Mahayana tradition, all the practice that you do for others. Um, and in a way, that's just affirming that reality that we're all knitted together, we're all enmeshed in this situation. So it does, in a way, it doesn't make sense to just get out ourselves. I mean, how can we? Because we're in this situation with others. So that's the same for chanting the refuges and precepts, and it changes it. If you think I'm doing this for all beings, or chanting a mantra, I'm doing this for all beings. Even and this is one thing I've found really helpful is looking after ourselves. You know, if you're feeling a bit worn out, taking a nap, and you can do it for all beings because you're going to be in a better position to help them if you're not exhausted, and it can really shift our way of living in the world if we think in that kind of way. Um, and we're opening a space when we do this. We're opening a space for something to come in that we feel that's from outside of us, outside of what we know. It's like the Buddha pecking on the outside of the shell, and it is a little bit mysterious. Now, we had in the puja last night. We had this phrase when we were worshipping Tara. She's the mysterious queen. And she's associated as well with Amoghasiddhi, the green Buddha. And he's particularly mysterious. I mean, all the Buddhas are mysterious, but he's particularly mysterious. He's associated with action. He's Amoghasiddhi is the head of the Karma family of enlightened Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and it's karma, of course, means action. And the particular action that's being referred to here is the action that responds, but doesn't respond from craving. So it's quite hard to imagine what action is when coming from a being who has no self-referential egotism or self-referential craving. That's what's being pointed to. That's what we're kind of opening up to. This kind of kind of a force or a motive power. That's what we're opening up to when we open up to Tara. Tara has that fearlessness and that mysterious greenness. And the beautiful thing is that it's not just something that we open up to. It's like a dynamic force. I think that's why the image of the river in Heaney's poem is so beautiful, because it suggests that love that we open up to is and can be a force that can animate us in what we're doing in our everyday life, doing the shopping and buying the potatoes and peeling them and putting them in the pot and all of those things. And there's a poem by one other thing I wanted to mention is that each of the Buddha families is associated with an element. So Ratnasambhava is associated. The Buddha is associated with earth, and Akshobhya is associated with water, and Amitabha is associated with fire, and Amoghasiddhi and Tara are associated with the element wind. Now you can imagine, like these days we know about gases, and we know about thermal dynamics and all this kind of stuff, but the ancient people, they didn't know about that. So so wind is quite a mysterious element because it just arises and it moves things, and it's very, very strange. There's a great. It reminds me of the Birth of Venus. Who is it? Is it Botticelli? That famous picture of the Birth of Venus. She arises on a on a shell, clamshell, a little bit like Tara actually. And you see that the winds in the corner of the pictures, these little faces that are blowing like this. Um, so yeah, so the point is that wind, and wind and the system of the elements is that which animates life, which animates the other elements. But it's all about movement. So even in the Tibetan sort of tantric systems, thoughts are seen to be like winds within the body. Thoughts and emotions are like winds, internal winds within the body. Um, so that Amoghasiddhi and Tara kind of represent this wind, this movement that we can participate in if we become sufficiently sensitive by reaching out through the Brahma Viharas and reaching up through puja and mantra and so on. And this comes out particularly forcefully in a poem by Sangharakshita again. It's one of the poems of his that I really love. It's in a way quite simple, and it's called The Wind, and he wrote it very late in his life. And apparently he just wrote it. It just came to him. He just wrote it down complete. It was one of these poems that just kind of arose without. He said he didn't really work on it. He just came to him and he wrote it down, and he just left it as it was. So this is The Wind. A wind was in my sails. It blew stronger and fiercer hour by hour. I did not know from whence it came or why, I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks, sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy, sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still now I am old. It lives in me, its breath, my breath, its will, my will. So I think that very beautifully captures the sense of participating in some kind of energy that is both kind of part of us, but somehow outside of us. And it's that energy that we need in order to really meet the situation that we're in. The situation that there's all these beings, including us, that want to be free. And it's something that we can participate in. It's something that we can plug into, and it's something that we can participate and cooperate with others. And that is really the essence of what a spiritual community is. It's a community of people that are actively engaging with that kind of energy, with that, well, kind of a cosmic force. So I just wanted to finish with a prayer that comes. It's the full sense of that prayer for generating the bodhicitta that comes at the beginning of that sadhana that I mentioned at the beginning. And interestingly, at the end, it involves wishing the Brahma Viharas for others, that they may inhabit the Brahma Viharas too. So I'll just read it and then we'll finish. So this is generating the bodhicitta. Whatever merit I gain by the practice of giving and the other perfections, let it benefit all beings, that they may achieve Buddhahood. I and all other beings are primordially Buddhas. Let us raise the bodhicitta, that we know this to be so. Beings who are our mothers and fathers wander in samsara. So with unbearable longing, we generate the unbearable longing to become a Buddha. In order to save all sentient beings, I will practice the 2 stages of the yoga of the profound path of the Guru until I have attained supreme enlightenment. By the strength of this aspiration, may all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be freed from suffering and the causes of suffering. Whatever happiness they enjoy, may it never come to an end. and may they always dwell in the immeasurable equanimity, which has neither near nor far, attraction or aversion.